Chapter 11. Max, I'll be out in a minute, Liz called from the bathroom. Okay, he replied. Liz felt guilty taking so long in the shower, but she couldn't pass up the opportunity. She had made do for weeks now with 5-minute showers in motel rooms with 5 other people waiting their turn. She had even been tempted to fill up the giant claw-footed tub and soak, but Max was waiting for her, though not because he wanted to get into the shower. Liz slipped on her black nightgown. She and Maria had bought identical ones 2 nights ago, not knowing when they would get the chance to use them since they were always crowded into a single motel room. From the look of things between Maria and Michael lately, Liz didn't think Michael would be seeing Maria tonight. But then again, Liz had been surprised when Maria had bought it, considering how things had been between her and Michael. Well, Max was going to get his surprise right now, Liz thought as she ran a brush through her hair and checked it in the mirror. Looking down at the sink, Liz saw a brand new hand soap. There had been unopened soap in the bath, as well as shampoo and conditioner. Like the food in the kitchen, it made her nervous. Someone had taken pains to stock the house, and for all they knew, people would be moving in tomorrow morning. As long as they don't show up tonight, Liz thought, giving herself one last check in the mirror. She and Max would be sharing a bed in a private room. For the first time since they left Roswell, she didn't intend to waste it. She opened the door and stepped into the bedroom. Max was lying on the bed in the dim light of a bedside lamp. He didn't even raise an eyebrow at seeing her outfit. Well, she could play it cool too. She didn't say anything and bent down to rummage through her bag for a moment. Then she got up and casually walked over to the bed. Max was sitting up against the headboard, and it looked like he hadn't moved since she had left to go into the shower. Max, she finally said, leaning closer to get a better look at him in the low light. Although he was sitting up and looked alert, his eyes were closed and he was sound asleep. Liz shook her head. He had responded to her maybe a minute ago when she had called out from the bathroom. Still, she knew he was a heavy sleeper and he seemed to be able to go right to sleep even when worry made it difficult for her. For a moment, she considered shaking him, but decided against being selfish. After the day they'd had, Max was more than entitled to some rest. Besides, there was no way to know what tomorrow would bring. Liz slipped his jeans and shirt off, knowing it would take more than that to wake him. Then she pulled the quilt up to his shoulders. Well, Max will have to get his surprise another time, she thought. Isabel saw that the handwriting on the next page was ragged, as if the man who had written it was shaky. There was no date on top. I knew something was wrong when I woke. I fell asleep with my head on Claire's lap while she held our baby in her arms. I woke slowly, then started up when I realized that something was different. I had been dreaming of a fire, no doubt because of the heat from my wife's fever. Then the fire in my dreams went out. The change woke me, and for a wonderful moment, I thought her fever had broken. I felt a brief swell of joy. My wife would be well. Everything would be all right. Then I realized something was wrong. The fever was gone, but she was cold, and so was our child. I frantically tried to wake them, raving as I did. My sounds woke Father, who came quickly. He checked them both, and his face was stricken. He put his arms around me for the first time in my living memory and said, "They're gone, son." I pushed him away, still raving. He had to fix this, I screamed. He could make calls. He had doctors, lawyers. He needed to pay someone, do something. I was mad, and in my madness, I could only think that Father had never failed at anything in his life. The world seemed to bend to his will. There was nothing he could not do. He let me rave and then gently laid me down next to my Claire and our Jonathan. Father made calls. Men came. They wore masks and wanted to take Claire and Jonathan from me. I would not let them. I told them that Father would fix it. They waited. Finally, I let them take my wife and son. They were gone, and I was in a world I did not understand. The next entry also had no date. This morning, I tended Andrew and Sarah while I was vaguely aware that Father was making calls and some sort of arrangements. For a moment, I was grateful that the fever had kept Andrew and Sarah from waking. For long, I am a coward. I did not know how I would answer them if they asked for their mother. Sarah woke briefly and looked at me for a moment of complete clarity and said, "Daddy, I'm thirsty." She could not sit up, so I propped her head with pillows and fed her water with a spoon. She looked at me for one wonderful moment and said, "Thank you, Daddy." She passed in the night. I did not rave this time. Father, Father called the same men again, and they came in their protective mask. I wanted to tell them they didn't need their mask. This terrible disease only took women and children, my woman and my children, but I found that I could not speak. I did not let them take Sarah for hours, not because I thought Father would fix this or God would take it back, but because I could not make my hands release her. Later, Claire came to speak to me when Father was out. I was surprised, but she told me she would explain everything. She said she could only stay a little while. She just wanted me to know that everything was going to be all right. Next time, she would stay longer and bring Jonathan with her. Andrew is worse. He wakes briefly sometimes, but by now I know the signs. Claire stopped in with Jonathan to tell me not to worry. I cannot help it, but felt better when she gave me Jonathan to hold. I was glad to see them both free of the sickness. They are fully recovered now. Though I begged her, she said they could not stay long. She kissed me and said, "It's getting late." Then she left before Father returned. Later, I gave Andrew some water with a spoon. Then, God forgive me, I drank from the same spoon. I know now that God has only made me wait to become sick so that I could take care of my family, but I do not think I can wait anymore. Father came in as I was doing it and screamed from across the room. He ripped the spoon from my hand and looked at me with a crazed, furious expression on his face. I thought for a moment that he might strike me. Then he broke down in front of me. "No, not you," he said, tears running down his face. He was in such pain that I had to tell him that Claire had been to see me and brought Jonathan. She had told me that everything was going to be all right. I shared Andrew's spoon again when Father was out. I know Claire told me not to worry, but I could not help it. I climbed into Andrew's bed, hoping that if I kept him near me and kept awake, he would be well. I lay with him for hours and tried to will him to get well. In the end, I failed. I fell asleep, and in the morning he was gone. All of them gone. Not even Claire could console me, even though she brought Jonathan and Sarah to visit me. I begged her to stay, but she had to leave when Father came back with the men who wanted to take Andrew from me. I told them to go away. They had taken the others, but I would not let them take my son. I was determined not to let them, but I failed again. As it grew dark, I fell asleep. They must have taken him then. Claire visited me while I slept. She had all of the children with her. We played as a family, as we had planned to do in the summer. When I woke, it was just Father and I.
He does not look well. When did father get so old?
I did not think it was possible. He seemed beyond such things, immune. Father tried to get me to leave the infirmary, but I refused. I still feel well, but I know that I must be sick. Claire and the children became sick. How could I be spared? So I lay in the last bed, the only one that had not been used. Father cleaned and brought me food. He would leave me only briefly to make calls. I wish he would leave me alone. Claire and the children can only come when he is gone. My brother Matthew came to visit today. He came all the way from one of his trips to Africa. Father embraced him when he arrived, and I do not think he knew what to do. I tried to call for Claire and the children, who were so fond of their Uncle Matthew, but they did not come. Perhaps later. Father and Matthew tried to get me to get dressed. They wanted me to attend a service of some kind. It was not like Father. To my knowledge, he had not seen the inside of a church since he was married to my mother. I refused to go. I explained to Father that I had spent entirely too much time away from my family. In fact, I had decided to take my vacation early and he would have to learn to do without me in the mills for some time. I was ready for a fight. I know how stubborn Father can be, but I was determined, and I have some of Father's resolve myself. So Father and Matthew went to the service without me. I was glad to be alone. Claire and the children came for a nice long visit. Claire convinced me to leave the infirmary. I did not want to go, but she explained that it made the children nervous to be there, so I agreed. Upstairs, we all gathered in the master bedroom. I made a fire, and Claire and I played with the children. Later, we put the children to sleep in their own beds, and Claire and I were alone for the first time in too long. She had something to ask me, and I could tell that it pained her. She told me I had to let her and the children go. For the first time in our marriage, I was angry with her. Her request was ridiculous. She was as bad as my father. I told her we needed to spend more time together as a family. She tried to bring it up again later, but I would not have it. I did not think it was possible, but I had to deny my wife something she wanted. She has asked for so little from me in the past, and it pained me to do it, but I had to be firm. Matthew and Father returned that night. To my surprise, Matthew said he would be staying for a while. He wanted to spend time with me. He would also take on more responsibilities at the mills. I'm sure that pleased Father, though he doesn't show it. Unfortunately, they want to stay at the house. I only hope they don't stay too long. Claire and the children still won't come when they're around. After that, there were perhaps 2 dozen undated entries. He began dating them again in the 1950s. Most of his writing detailed the time he spent with his wife and children, who never aged or changed. The later entries were disjointed and hard to follow. Isabel felt a sinking in her chest, imagining the man wandering his house for decades with only his memories of his wife and children for company. He never returned to work. Eventually, his father and brother moved out and would come by for regular visits to bring him food and clean up. As far as Isabel could tell, he never left the house as the years went by. Soon there were only a few entries per year, then a few per decade. The house had been haunted for nearly 50 years, but not by ghosts, by a man who had lost everything and everyone. The final entry was dated 1988, just a year after Isabel, Michael, and her brother climbed out of their pods. The entry was short and the handwriting barely legible. I think the sickness has finally come for me. I knew it would. Lately, Claire does everything for me and will not let me do anything for myself. Fortunately, the children are a great help to her. It is only fair you took care of all of us, she said. When I finish this, I will put my book on the shelf with the others. Father will be pleased that I have completed this part of our family history. Father visits regularly now, and the children are always happy to see him. He looks well, not like he did when the children were sick. This time has made him a better father and grandfather. He also seems happy. He and I have wonderful discussions about everything from the family business to politics. He thinks that war will be coming soon and that the mills will be able to help in the effort. I think he's right, but I told him that I am not ready to end my vacation. Work will have to wait. A man's family must come first. Now I must go to the infirmary, which I have not visited in some time. Claire and the children said they will take care of me, and Father will be there too, of course. It's getting late. Isabel stared at the last sentence for a long time. Chapter 12. Isabel finally closed the book and put it back on the shelf, but she could not shut the images of the family from her mind, especially Robert, who lived here alone until his 80s. She felt a tightening and then a lurching in her throat and fought it down. Had Claire and the children remained in the house somehow, or part of them at least. What about now? She felt she and her friends were not alone in the house, that it was not empty, at least not completely. Was it Robert Benton and his family, or some part of them they had left behind? And were they trying to tell her something? She had felt something odd when they arrived. The house had felt familiar and comfortable. Had they been communicating with her? And what about the journal? That particular book had fallen off the shelf and it had opened the first day the family got sick. And then there was the strange behavior of the van, cutting out when they tried to leave, but working fine when they decided to head for the house and stay the night. But why bring them here? Why show her the book? Did the Bentons want something from them or from her? What could it be? It all sounded crazy, even in her own head, but there were things going on here she could not explain, feelings she could not explain. And what did Robert Benton mean when he wrote, "It's getting late"? Alex had said that to her in her dream. Remembering that dream gave Isabel a fresh run of chills. She had tried not to think about it. Was Alex really making contact with her, or was she just imagining things? Like Robert Benton, she thought. He imagined his family, day after day, year after year, then decade after decade. For almost 50 years, he had roamed this house, haunted it really, driven mad by his loss. Except Isabel wasn't sure he was mad. In fact, she was sure he wasn't, at least not completely. She was sure he had felt something of his lost wife and children. It might have been as simple as the lingering feeling you had for someone you had dreamed about before you woke. Or had they been here in a more real way? And Isabel could make contact with people as they dreamed. Maybe she was in some kind of contact with the Bentons. Maybe she was in some kind of contact with Alex for that matter. But what then? Isabel racked her brain for the ghost stories she had read and the movies she had seen. Spirits sometimes tried to find peace by pointing out their killer if they were murdered. But the Bentons had died from disease over 50 years ago. Some ghosts were malevolent, wanting to harm the living. In one story she had read, the ghost had driven a woman to suicide so her spirit would stay in their house. But that didn't fit here. The Bentons were a normal family. For all their wealth, they were a happy, normal family. Like we were, she thought. Isabel thought of her childhood, the happiness she and Max had found with their adopted parents. For years, even their great secret was only an occasional worry blotted out by the family life. That life was what she wanted to have with Jesse, something normal, something good. Maybe it was too much for her to hope for with Jesse or with anyone else. Now she had lost him as well as mom and dad. It was only she and Max now, just like they were when they first crawled out of the pods and into the desert. Was that why Robert Benton had shown her his book? Did he think she might understand his loss, if only in some small way? There were too many questions for her to answer tonight. She felt drained by what she had read. Isabel laid her head down on the bed that Robert and Clara Benton had shared half a century before and heard a noise. Footsteps in the hallway, then laughter. Her first thought was that her brother and friends had to keep it down. People were trying to sleep. Then she realized that the laughter sounded more like a child's. When she heard it again, she was sure it was a little girl. Immediately, Isabel was on her feet. She slipped on her shoes and was glad that she had never undressed for bed. She heard running, and then she was opening her own door and looking down the hallway. No one was there. Well, no one but Kyle, she thought, looking down and seeing him asleep in front of her door. He's keeping an eye on me, she realized. The gesture was sweet, but unnecessary. She was more than capable of defending herself. Quickly, she stepped over Kyle, careful not to wake him. Then she walked down the hallway, following the sound of the laughter and footsteps. She heard creaking and saw that one of the bedroom doors was slightly open. It was the first room they had seen. She knew this had been Sarah Benton's room. Isabel also knew that when she had left the room, she had closed the door. Now the door was half open. Laughter was coming from inside the room. No, not laughter, giggling, Isabel corrected herself. Without hesitation, Isabel pushed the door all the way open, stepped inside, and scanned the room in the dim light that came from the hallway. There was nothing there. Isabel flipped the switch on the wall, and suddenly the room was bathed in light. Her eyes adjusted quickly, and when they did, they confirmed what she had seen before. The room was empty. However, the rocking horse was now gently moving back and forth. That could be because of the breeze I created when I opened the door, she thought, but she immediately dismissed the notion. She was nearly certain that the rocking horse had been still when she'd first stepped into the room, but more than that, she felt a presence. Someone had set the horse in motion, and that someone was still in the room. Isabel opened the closet. She got a chill when she saw the little girl's clothes there, frilly dresses, nightgowns, and casual play clothes of different kinds. Sarah's clothes. She looked at the artifacts from more than half a century before and saw Sarah's life as clearly as she could see her own childhood. This girl had worn these clothes, played with the dolls in this room, and she had loved her parents. And then she died in this house, Isabel thought. Her stomach seized when she thought of how this little girl had died. She was third, after her mother and baby brother. It was too horrible, and Isabel turned away from the clothes and stepped out of the closet. Next, she bent down to check under the bed. There was nothing there. She heard laughter behind her and whipped around. Nothing. If this is one of my friends, Isabel thought, if this is someone's idea of a joke, but it was not a joke, and the sounds were not made by any of her friends. Impossible as it might seem, a little girl named Sarah who had lived and died in this house 50 years before was making them. It was impossible, completely impossible, she knew. She also knew it was true. Sarah, she said, keeping her voice soft. There was no response. Isabel looked out into the hallway. She didn't see anything in the dim light. Then there was the laughter again from behind her in the room. A smile crossed Isabel's lips. It's a game, she thought. The soft, nearly inaudible laughter continued. Somehow Isabel knew it would not stop until she turned around. The smile still on her lips, Isabel got ready to quickly peek back into the room when her ears picked up another sound. Isabel, a voice said from the direction of the staircase. The sound of her own name jolted her much more than the laughter of a girl who had been gone from the earth for more than 60 years. She also realized that at the exact moment that someone spoke her name, the laughter behind her stopped, as if the voice had startled Sarah as well. Isabel, the voice repeated. Yes, Isabel called, starting out the door. It was probably Max or one of the others looking for her. The voice sounded familiar, but it was hard to be sure. She walked quickly to the balcony. Looking down into the dim light provided by the dying fire, she saw a hunched figure dash into the shadows. For a second, she thought she was looking at Robert Benton, who was still alive and roaming the house. But for reasons she could not explain, she was certain that the last entry he had made in his journal upstairs was made on the last day of his life, more than 10 years ago. She glanced quickly back down the hallway to Sarah's room and then beyond, where her friends were sleeping. For a moment, she had an urge to go back and wake up Max and Michael, but she didn't want to waste time explaining what she was feeling, knowing they might not believe her, even if they somehow understood. As she headed to the top of the stairs and then down to the main floor, once there, she called out, "Hello?" There was no response. Then she called out softly, "Robert? Robert Benton?" She felt silly for a moment, calling out to someone long gone, but she knew what she felt. Another flash of movement. She saw the same figure disappear into the rear of the house, and this time she saw him more clearly. He was wearing some type of a hood and he looked small, or was it just that he was hunched over? Well, Isabel was going to find out once and for all what was going on in this house. If the Bentons were somehow behind this, then there was a reason. Maybe they needed something from her. Maybe she could help them. Isabel headed into the hallway past the dining room. And then she caught another glimpse of the hooded figure as he disappeared into the kitchen. Isabel started running. She wouldn't let this go another second. Whatever was going on in this house, she would know right now. When she reached the kitchen, she saw a door swing open and the figure dash into it. The door was next to a large walk-in pantry, and Isabel realized she and her friends had forgotten something important when they had quickly searched the house. The basement, she thought. She reached for the door, opened it, and looked down into complete darkness. Well, that makes sense, she thought. If I'm chasing a ghost, he wouldn't need lights. She did, though, and hit the switch next to the wall. A bare bulb above her lit up, and she could see lights come on at the bottom of the stairs. The basement came into view as she descended. There were no surprises there. It was a large space full of indoor and outdoor furniture, as well as tools and other equipment. Unlike the rest of the inside of the house, the basement looked old. Time had not stopped here. Things had rusted and decayed. She smelled dust, mildew, and something else she could not place. It was unpleasant, whatever it was. Isabel was ready to search the maze of junk when she heard a door creak. The sound came from behind the ancient looking boiler which stood in front of an old wooden door hanging half open. She opened the door and peered inside. There were stairs leading down to a brightly lit space, some sort of a sub basement. From what she could see, the space looked clean as if it had been very well maintained. She felt a tinge of nervousness. Isabel brushed it aside. She sensed that even if this house was full of spirits, they were good. Whatever they might want from her, they meant her no harm. Unless it's like that ghost story. Unless they're trying to trick you, her mind warned. There was a crawling sensation on the back of her neck as if she was being watched. She turned around quickly and couldn't see anyone there. Isabel started to call out, but found that she didn't want to break the silence around her. She turned and took the first step down the stairs. The sound of her foot on the steps suddenly seemed very loud to her, and she considered turning around now and waking up Max and Michael. Again, she decided not to. She would solve this herself. This wasn't a movie, and she wasn't a moron in a nightshirt rushing into the arms of the axe murderer in the basement. Isabel flexed her hand, feeling her powers coalesce around and inside of her. She was more than able to defend herself against anything. If there were good spirits here, she would try to find out what they wanted. If there was something else here, something darker, she could handle that too. Isabel continued down the stairs and into a corridor brightly lit with long fluorescent lights. Then there it was, at the end of the corridor. The figure was standing, facing her. No, it wasn't a figure. Isabel could see that it was a person. It was wearing some kind of an old fashioned cloak. The person was small and stooped, his face covered by a hood. He looked solid and real, and he was right in front of her. For a moment, Isabel just stared, not wanting to speak. The figure spoke first. Isabel. The voice was male and vaguely familiar. Yes, she said, keeping her voice firm only with effort. Isabel, the figure repeated, lifting its head. Slowly he pulled away the hood, revealing a decayed face, gray and sick, rotting. A scream escaped her lips as she stood transfixed by the horror in front of her. Suddenly, Isabel understood everything. She only hoped she had time to warn the others. Foolishly, she had walked into this, but they still had a chance. Max! She screamed as loudly as she could, turning to run. Something grabbed her from behind. An invisible hand held her for a moment and then pulled her back away from the door and the stairs. She tried to scream again, but found that her wind was gone. She heard the door slam behind her. It was heavy and would drown out any further sound she made. Isabel, you only just got here. I insist you stay a while, the voice behind her said.